Thank you for joining us for Brain Candy, a virtual salon series by Vanguard Culture. Vanguard Culture is an all-volunteer nonprofit dedicated to advancing San Diego's creative industry workforce. We provide award-winning arts coverage of San Diego's arts and culture community. We produce cultural events that bring together creatives from a variety of different industries and professional development opportunities that work to create arts jobs, bring diverse communities together, and inspire creative collaboration. For more information, please visit vanguardculture.org. This program is part of our Forum Professional Development Series. We're very happy to acknowledge our wonderful program sponsor, Jack Lample, for helping us to produce free and low-cost programming in 2020 that provides resources and opportunities to help creatives make a living doing what they love. We are also very happy to acknowledge our partners at Idea One, where we have an arts residency downtown. Thank you so much. We could not do this without your support. Okay, hello. My name is Susana Paredes-Swap. I'm Vanguard Culture's founder and executive director. Thank you for joining us for our new virtual salon series, Brain Candy. Inspired by the French salons of the early 18th century, Brain Candy is a contemporary version of this Enlightenment-era institution, which provided a safe space for men and women to congregate for intellectual discourse. Each event in our series will bring together creative leaders from a variety of different industries to discuss the nuances of their craft, to inspire future arts leaders, and to encourage a sharing of ideas and resources. Today's edition brings together curators from a variety of different types of exhibition spaces from San Diego, Tijuana, Baja California, Mexico, and Washington, D.C. We're truly honored to have such a prestigious group of arts leaders with us today. We know these are trying times, and on behalf of the entire Vanguard Culture family, we hope that you and your loved ones are staying safe, sane, and inspired during this strange and uncertain moment in history. I know that I'm not alone in this circle of arts leaders to reaffirm the power of the arts to heal very deep wounds. The world was already teeming with uncertainty from the pandemic, and now we're in the midst of a reckoning from centuries of racial tension. I hope that the current growing pains of social justice, provoked by the deaths of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and countless others, will break open opportunities for a positive transformation around the nation and the world. Today, as curators, as storytellers, arts leaders, and most of all, as human beings, we will focus on resilience, creativity, and hope as it relates to the future of museums and exhibition spaces. I want to remind you that this is a salon-style event. I'll spend a few minutes introducing each of our speakers, and then we will open up our conversation to speak as an open forum. At this time, we will take questions from the audience once we're in an open forum format. So with that, it is my pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Megan Dickerson. She is the Director of Exhibitions at the New Children's Museum. Megan Dickerson is an exhibition developer and community organizer whose 20-year museum career has included work at contemporary art museums, historic sites, and children's museums. At Boston Children's Museum for over a decade, Megan oversaw museum community partnerships, bringing pop-up museum experiences to public housing, community centers, libraries, and parking lots. In her role at San Diego New Children's Museum, Megan collaborates with artists to develop emergent, site-specific artworks for a family audience. Outside of museums, Megan maintains a public art practice that has involved everything from projecting Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory in full smell-o-vision to an annual art encampment takeover of Boston Harbor Island. Megan is one of the first Americans to earn a master's in play and playwork, a practice that originated on adventure playgrounds in the United Kingdom and in Scandinavia, and she writes regularly on play and urbanism. So welcome, Megan. Thank you for being here. Let me see if I can find you. Go ahead and unmute yourself, my dear.
Great, yeah. So thank you, Susanna. I've been at the New Children's Museum for 7 years, and the work that we do is very focused on both contemporary art and children's museums. So if you're not familiar with the New Children's Museum, we're a hybrid contemporary art museum and children's museum, which when I say that to most people in the curatorial world, they have a moment of cognitive dissonance. They don't understand how those two things can come together. And I also want to acknowledge that Lauren is my predecessor. So she was at the New Children's Museum for about, I think, as long as I was, as I've been there. So the work that we do, we are closed right now to the public. We don't have an official reopening date yet. We have hosted as many as, we typically would do these large scale exhibitions every year when we opened in 2008 as the New Children's Museum. In the last 6 years or so, we've been doing smaller projects, solo projects, where we focus on one artist. And it's been very important for us to bring the artists that we commission into community settings to develop their work, so that we're thinking about the kind of work that we're creating, not just prototyping with people who are already coming to the New Children's Museum, but people who may not have experience with the New Children's Museum yet. So it's community-based exhibition development is the way that we talk about it.
And are all of your artists local or across the country?
There's a range. Last year we opened a work by Toshiko Horyoju McAdam, who is, a Japanese artist who lives in Canada. Our current artist residence is Panka. Some of you may be familiar with her work, living in Tijuana, but from Chula Vista. So there's a range.
Yeah. I'm curious to sort of, we have a range of participants on the line today. Some of them are curators, some of them are emerging museum professionals, some of them are just artists interested in this world. And so we all have different versions of what we interpret as what the role of a curator. So we know that it's to preserve and interpret artifacts for public consumption. At least that's the general term. And tell us what you see your core role and function as a curator.
Well, I think about that a lot. And I think about the roots of the word, to care for things is usually where that came from. But I think of my role really as caring for people, and thinking about the idea even of, curadora, or healing, or what can art do in our community. So, I've also talked about my work as sort of a midwifery kind of, because no artist creates completely in isolation. No curator creates in isolation. And I think that what we're doing is we're constantly co-creating the space with the children and families who are coming into our museum. It's different every single time. So our curatorial work isn't creating an exhibition, presenting it, and then stepping away to the next project. It's less landscape architecture and more gardening. Constantly tinkering, right? Constantly shifting with the changes that are brought to our museum based on who's in the room.
I love that. I love that so much. Thank you. So we're going to move on and introduce our next speaker for now. Let's see. Okay, so our next speaker is Gaidi Finnie. He's the executive director at San Diego African American Museum of Fine Art. Prior to his most recent appointment as the executive director of the Aja Project and Bayview Baptist Church, Gaidi Finnie served for 4 years as managing director of the North Coast Repertory Theater in Solana Beach, where he was responsible for the fiscal management of the organization and all aspects of human resources. During his tenure, despite national economic downturn, the theater grew and did not have to compromise quality programming. Upon his departure, the theater was in a strong financial position. From 1997 to 2007, Mr. Finnie served as assistant director of the San Diego Museum of Photographic Arts, the MOPA, here in San Diego. During his final year, he served as the MOPA's interim director. He served on the Port of San Diego's Public Art Committee from 2002 to 2008, chairing the organization in 2006. He is the former president of the board of directors for Balboa Park Central, a nonprofit organization tasked with the coordination of numerous institutions occupying the park and the visitors they serve. In 2004, the Balboa Park Central merged with the Balboa Park Conservancy. Gaidi currently serves as secretary of the board of directors. In 2013, Gaidi was responsible for reestablishing the San Diego, California African American Museum of Fine Art. Mr. Gaidi holds a Bachelor of Arts from Osberg College, a certificate of the French language from the Collège International Académie Française, and a Juris Doctorate from William Mitchell College of Law. So welcome, Mr. Finnie.
Hey, we go back a ways, don't we, huh?
We do, my friend. It's been a long time. So it's so great to see your face. I miss you. I'm sending all my love to you and your beautiful family. Give us a sense, and so your museum doesn't actually have a brick and mortar space. So give us a sense of your exhibition program. What does that look like, or what has it looked like in the past? Where are you at?
And then also, just remind me to tell you a little story before this is over. That's part of it.
Okay.
I've always felt the need to have a presence of African American fine art, and I started that in high school. But we restarted the museum because it really is a lack of that in San Diego. I'm talking about the fine arts, not just the fine arts, and it's important because we need to show that to people. So as a museum, we started out at Baby Baptist Church when I decided to revive the museum. But we wanted to have the best art from around the country, potentially from Washington D.C., the Smithsonian, that would stop here, and we'd have a place for it. But we couldn't do that at the church. Although I did look at rebuilding the church and raising money and had an architect to see how that would happen. But in fact, it was much easier for us to go forward by collaborating with other museums. So therefore, we started collaborating with the San Diego State. We've collaborated with the Veterans Museum. We've collaborated with the San Diego History Center. We recently finished an exhibit with San Diego Museum of Art, and currently looking at potentially working with the Timken on another project. And you know, it's funny because when the pandemic happened and everything closed down, it was just a weird thing because it felt like everybody was without a space. And so I didn't feel like so alone as being just a museum without walls.
Mm-hmm.
How, because we depend on the other museums to work with, we also need them to come back so we could potentially collaborate again. It's not to say that we don't want our own brick and mortar space, but really right now, that's probably not the best thing to try to do. And in fact, my board had asked me if I would start to make sure we look for some spaces for us to have on our own. And I started that out with that, but then the pandemic came and everything changed. So I'm really not looking there. It's still in the back of our minds, but right now our survival really is connected to the other museums that hopefully will open.
Mm-hmm. It seems like you're lean and mean right now. You know, it's an opportunity where you can actually not have that overhead and that worry that some of the larger institutions have, and be able to do pop-ups. It's almost an opportunity. Yeah,
and funny because in December we had a huge donation of museum quality African art that was given to us, and we never really collected. So now we have that, and we're cataloging, and we are going to soon have our first online exhibit of Shona sculpture.
Wow. And did you say that you're working with the Timken? Is that potentially the venue for that?
That's a whole separate thing.
Okay.
Timken and I are working on, and this is news, a Wiley exhibit.
You heard it here first.
So it's not totally there yet, but very close. The thing is, the pieces of work are so big they can't fit in the building. So that we're trying out how to get it in there.
Wow.
That's kind of cool. But I wanted to tell you this story because I think it's important in light of the world situation. Because many times, as an executive in the arts, and as an African American, I've been at galas and wealthy folks' houses where I felt I had to leave because I was scared to be in the neighborhood at that time of night. I left galas at 10 when they went till 2 in the morning because I said, I'll be here as an African American driving around La Jolla or Rancho Santa Fe or some of the other areas. And it really has happened many times. And for instance, here's another one that's related, because I was going to the freeway from my house in Imperial Beach, driving down Imperial Beach Boulevard. I noticed the police behind me, and I'm like, he's just following me. Why? I haven't done anything. And I'm driving, I still see him. So finally, I pull into a little Mexican market and go inside. He comes into the market.
Wow.
He says to me, I was at the Museum of Photographic Arts last night, and there was this photographer I loved, I wanted to talk to you about. And I went, I really. So after we talked about it, and I gave him my card, he gave me his card. He said, if you ever have any trouble, use this card. Now, fast forward, I'm coming home from an event, going the other way toward my house, and I pull up to my house and stop. The police didn't stop me and say, you didn't stop at the stop sign. I said, I have to, because I live here. And they've been pulling me over in front of my house for not stopping, which I'd already stopped. I had to use the card in order to get out of that. That's how I wish it. But I mean, it's that kind of thing that happens. And I gave you that example as a Black arts person having to deal with arts issues and going to these events and galas and being African American and then worried, because it happens so often. Anyways, that's it.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing that. That's incredible, and it's actually not incredible. I mean, this is the world that we're living in right now. This is the conversation that a lot of people are having a hard time knowing how to have. But I think, you know, we're in a safe space here, and I'd love to sort of establish that as a place where we can have these types of difficult conversations. Many people don't even know what to say. They don't know what to do. They don't know what, you know, should I reach out? Should I not reach out? Should I do this? Should I do that? You know, it took me a little while to reach out to you, and because I wasn't sure it was appropriate or it was going to offend you or anything, but I was feeling it and I was hurting for you and everyone else.
Well, sheriff who stopped me driving behind me, because I love art people. It's the reason I'm in this, because people who love art, it shows up in their face, their eyes, their passion. And that's what he had when he walked into the market to ask me about that photographer, although I was scared to death that he's going to try to do something crazy.
Right.
Kudos for his love of art.
Yeah, no, that's beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing. So we'll get back to these types of issues in a little bit. I'm going to move on to our next speaker. Okay, so the next speaker is Christine Heatbrink. She is the Deputy Director and Chief Curator at Mingei International Museum. Christine is, she joined the Mingei in June of 2010. Her curatorial projects at Mingei have included Art of the Americas, pre-Columbian art from Mingei's collection, related to the Gaidi Initiative's Pacific Standard Time, Black Dolls from the collection of Deborah Neff in 2015, Function and Fantasy, Stephen and William Ladd, and Bold Expressions, African American Quilts from the collection of Corinne Riley. She holds a BA in Art History from UCLA and an MA in Art History and Museum Studies from USC. Her previous experience includes nearly 15 years as curator at the Norton Simon Museum in Pasadena, California. Welcome, Christine.
Thank you. It's so good to be here.
Thank you. It's great to see you. So tell us where you are. I know you all have been under construction now for years. Is it 2 years?
Yeah. You know, we were already really kind of in closure mode. Mingei International closed in September of 2018 to undertake a major transformation. And luckily, you know, things have been able to progress. Our construction project at Balboa Park has been able to progress unimpeded. You know, we've had to follow extra cleaning protocols, security, just everything to be extra safe. And work has continued, so we feel really good about that. We're planning to reopen spring, summer of 2021. So we were already kind of closed, you know, working remotely. The staff had already been tasked with doing a lot of that deep work, you know, moving the collection offsite, trying to have remote locations. We have people working in Chula Vista. We have people working in Liberty Station. So when everything happened in March, we felt a little bit prepared for that. We'd already felt a little bit closed. I think one of the things that's been really helpful for me, for my team, for all of us on staff, is that we have this really exciting project, which is our new museum, our transformed space. Mm-hmm. And that's really been this bright light. You know, we articulated a lot of exciting new elements that we wanted to bring into our museum, which is ostensibly about art of the people. And this is such a great time to really be able to lean into our mission and really feel good about what we can do. We're hoping to really focus on our permanent collection. I think that's whenever a museum closes, I think you always want to have that ability to focus on your permanent collection, especially now. You know, it's going to be really challenging to move art around the city, around the country, around the world. So, you know, again, some of those silver linings are that we were deep in our strategic planning, deep in thinking about how we were going to reopen. So this has allowed us a little bit of a reset. We've been able to return to our documents and really make sure that we are making any changes that we can, you know, to infrastructure, knowing what we know now about the pandemic.
Yeah, have you had to implement any change orders in your construction
Well,
to respond?
I'm really glad that you asked that question. We have been able to do some slight kind of pivots, adaptations. Things like hands-free doors, that's been talked about, where you can almost like open a door with your forearm instead of using your hands.
Mm-hmm.
Using antimicrobial kind of surfaces, you can apply that to metals. We think we can add some fans to our roof structure, which will increase the ventilation, not only for the staff, but also for visitors.
Mm-hmm.
And those are kind of some of the things that we've been able to really highlight, but I think we're really going to be faced with having some remote experiences. People might be working on site for a couple of days. And we can maybe get into that when we get deeper into our salon.
Very quickly though, give me a sense of your exhibition program. So how many people are a part of your team in your exhibitions program? How many exhibits per year are you planning to host?
Right, well, since we've been closed, we've been popping up all over town. Last year we did exhibitions at the Downtown Public Library, at the Athenaeum and Barrio Logan. And we actually are opening 2 exhibitions in the next about 6 weeks. We had an exhibition planned at the Coronado Public Library, Around the World with Mingei International Museum. It was literally set to open in mid-March. We had the artwork packed in the van. So we're gonna get that exhibition up, and that's gonna open to the public on July 6th. And then an exhibition of our Mineki Neko, the beckoning cats from Japan. That pop-up exhibition will open at the Japanese Friendship Garden on August 1st. So we're really excited to have some pop-up exhibitions, and we've been doing about 2 to 3 a year.
And how many people on your exhibitions team?
We're about a team of 6 to 8. We have a registrar, collections manager, a senior curator, an exhibition designer, and everybody's been able to really work remotely. We have support from graphic design. We have art preparators deployed for exhibitions.
Okay, thank you. We're going to move on. Christine, I just want to give you the heads up that you might want to close some of your other tabs. You're starting to get a tiny bit choppy, so that'll probably help you. Okay, our next guest is, let me, hang on a sec. Okay, our next guest is Michael Lawrence. We call him, I think he prefers Mike. He's the Assistant Director for Exhibitions at the Smithsonian National Museum of Natural History in Washington, D.C. He leads the museum's staff of exhibits professionals in the planning, development, design, execution, and maintenance of all permanent and temporary exhibitions. He is responsible for management of the Deep Time Initiative, including 30,000 square foot renovation of the Fossil Hall, which is the largest exhibit project in the museum's history. Prior to this position, Mike served for 10 years as Chief of Design for the Office of Exhibits, where he was responsible for the design quality of all permanent and temporary exhibits, graphics, and signage within the museum. He provides oversight and guidance to contract design firms on major projects to ensure architecture, exhibits, graphics, and support materials meet the Smithsonian's high standards for quality, durability, accessibility, and visitor enjoyment. Mike and his staff design temporary exhibits generated by the museum and adapt traveling exhibits from other institutions to meet the museum's requirements. Before joining the Smithsonian, Mike served as senior architect and designer for MFM Design, Inc., a Washington, D.C. exhibit design firm. He contributed to the planning, content development, architectural planning, and design of major exhibitions for the Smithsonian Institution, Mount Vernon Estate and Gardens, National Park Service, and such private museums as the Fraser International History Museum in Louisville, Kentucky, and Tomo Kikuchi Museum in Tokyo. Mike is strongly committed to engaging the public in the museum's mission, integrating our research collections and educational goals with memorable, visible experiences. So welcome, Mike.
Well, thanks, Susanna. It's a pleasure to be here, representing the Eastern Seaboard, I guess. I answer to either Mike or Michael. I was Michael for my whole career until I first came to the Smithsonian, where my boss was Michael, and he said, this world is only big enough for one Michael, and I'm it. So I shifted so either one is fine.
Okay.
But it's a pleasure to be here. Just a little bit about us. Natural History Museum is one of 11 museums out of the 19 various units of the Smithsonian, which include research centers around the country, around the world. We are closed. We do not yet have a reopening date. The Smithsonian is reopening very gingerly. Our wonderful secretary, Lonnie Bunch, has said that health and safety are a primary importance for visitors and staff. So we're really just tiptoeing back into it. What we're going to do is a phased approach where the zoo, at least all of its outside exhibits, will likely open mid-July. And then between then and probably late August, even into September, the other museums will open. We have 11 museums just on the mall. We have 5 others in the greater DC area, ranging from small art galleries to ourselves and Air and Space. We have 300,000 square feet of public space. A lot of challenges. We have obviously the great benefit of being a quasi-federal agency. We have not had to do layoffs. Our restaurant and retail folks, unfortunately, have had to been furloughed or put on reduced work schedules. But we are all in the Zoom world. I was just on with someone the other day who claims she dreams in Zoom now, and I think we can all identify with that.
Absolutely.
So my department, I have about 24 people. We are strictly the exhibit, so curatorial, registration, all that is elsewhere. You could think of Natural History Museum as a public museum bracketed by a science institute. So we have over 300 scientists doing active research in the east and west wings of the building and elsewhere around the world. In my staff, I have exhibit developers, project managers, writers, editors, graphic design, 3D design, audiovisual, lighting, fabrication. For such a big place, we are a very small bones shop. We feel sometimes we have to do the same scrambling and trying to, won't say patch things together, but recycling has been part of our mantra for other than ecological reasons. It's often been because we can't afford to do it otherwise. We have some federal seed money to start exhibits, but we depend a lot on private endowment for supporting our larger exhibits and also for supporting our educational and visitor services programs. Our number of exhibits could range from 1 a year. Last year, we opened our Deep Time, our fossil hall, in June of last year. So it's just been 1 year and 2 weeks. That was, as Susanna said, a massive undertaking. So it was kind of all hands on deck for that. So we had a really modest exhibit opening then that year. Usually we do 2 to 5, I would say, in the course of a year, ranging from about 1,500 to about 4,500 square feet. Since we are primarily a visitor museum rather than, I'd say, a local or regional museum, we don't have a strong membership. We are free, so we don't need to offer membership for free parking or discounts or that sort of thing. Because of that, our local audience is one we're constantly trying to build. But our thought is that since our major audience really are national and international visitors, accounting for about 82% of our total visitors,
Wow.
we don't do the sort of churn rate in special exhibits for other museums and institutions that depend on, tickets and gate receipts and membership build and that sort of thing. We have a really timely exhibit called Outbreak, Epidemics in a Connected World that opened in May of 2018, which has clearly been a boon to educating our public. Although I have to say the week before we closed, when it was literally packed with people, I kind of wanted to go in with a Lysol on everyone and say, stand 6 feet apart, but at least they were learning. And we also have a free on-demand version of that exhibit. If people are interested, I'd be happy to talk about that later, or you're welcome to just drop me an email and I could let you know how that could be available to your school or museum or organization.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll mention to all of our speakers as well is we do want to provide resources and links and opportunities for learning to the participants. We have about 72 people registered last time I checked this morning, so I'm not sure how many will sign on this morning. Maybe a little more than that, but some of the folks here are museum professionals themselves, some are curators, some are, emerging museum professionals or artists. And so if you have anything that you think could be helpful to this audience, please send it my way, and then I'll send it out to the registrants in a follow-up email. So please do that.
Okay.
Thank you. So we're gonna, we'll move on to our next speaker and get back to you in a second, Mike.
Sure.
I'm choosing Mike, I think.
Okay, that's good.
Okay, our next speaker is Lauren Lockhart. Lauren Lockhart is the art program manager at San Diego International Airport. She leads the airport's efforts to realize ambitious public artworks which are seamlessly integrated into the airport environment. Through her work on public art and temporary exhibitions, Lockhart continually aspires to communicate meaningful stories of San Diego's history, culture, and people to the traveling public. Lockhart is an arts administrator and curator with more than 15 years of experience collaborating closely with artists. Before joining the Airport Authority, Lockhart was an independent curator and held positions at the New Children's Museum, Museum of Contemporary Art San Diego, and National Gallery of Art. She is co-chair of the Public Art Coalition of Southern California and a member of the Downtown San Diego Partnership Placemaking Committee. Lockhart holds an MA in Art History and Criticism from the University of California, Riverside, and a BA in Art History from the University of California in San Diego. So welcome, Lauren.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
Yes.
Pleasure to be here with all of you great panelists as well. So I know that Susanna knows our program very well. She was instrumental in the development as the program stands today. But for those of you who may not be familiar, we do have an arts program at the airport. Often there's not always awareness of that, but we have a very robust program that includes performing arts. Before we went into quarantine, we were up to nearly a performance a day in our terminals, so they're a really robust performing arts program. We have temporary exhibitions throughout the terminals, and I'm primarily responsible for our large-scale permanent public art commissions, and those are projects that are tied to capital projects. So in this current environment, as you can imagine, traffic is down hugely at the airport. And so in response to that, in an effort to keep our partners, our artists, the community groups that we partner with, and our travelers safe, we have had to postpone or hold off on a number of our ongoing programs, performances being one of those. But I think that as a team, we're a small team of 4 employees. We've done a good job of pivoting our work and doing as much as we can virtually, finding ways to still lift up the work and the voices of our artists as much as possible. And it's an ongoing challenge, something that we're learning every day how to do better. Since I think like many of us, had no idea how long we would be in this situation. But I'm excited that it's pushed us to think about how to do better outreach to our artists, how to be smarter about how we get the word out about future opportunities to them, and make sure that we're eliminating barriers to participation in our programs. So that's really a focus of my work right now, and I have a little bit of headspace being at home to be able to do that. So that's something I'm looking forward to continuing to do the work on.
Give us a sense of, and I know the answer to this, but maybe that's changed since I've been there. When I was there for 5 years. I curated 80 exhibitions in my tenure there, so I know I'm glad you have a staff of 4. There used to be 2 of us, so it's like it felt overwhelming then. I'm hoping it's not so now, but give us a sense of how many exhibition spaces you're talking about, how many exhibits per year, what does that exhibition plan typically look like, and maybe do you have a plan for what it will look like in the future?
Sure. So right now we have an annual thematic exhibition. We choose a theme that we hope will be exciting and relevant to artists working in the San Diego region to respond to, and something that will give us a chance to really showcase the talent right here in our region. Those typically include up to 18 different individual artists and installations. And so In a way, though it's a single annual exhibition, it's really like 18 mini exhibitions as we're dealing with the constraints and challenges of each different site, which, as you know well, and all of you on the call can imagine, they're very unique challenges in every single site in the airport. And then, you know, in my work primarily focused on public art, we have anywhere from 1 to 2 to up to maybe 8 different public art commissions at various stages of development, and those projects can last in development for up to 4 years. And so these are ongoing projects that I'm continuing to work on with artists, both locally and across the country.
And last question before we introduce the next speaker, how many people moved before COVID moved through your space, and how many are moving through it now?
Oh, I should know that stat, but I don't want to misquote myself, but I can say, just looking at the statistics today, we're still down more than 80% of our typical traffic. At the height of the pandemic, I think we were down 97%. So traffic is slowly picking back up, but it's just so difficult to say. We have no idea when things will really start to return to the volumes that we were previously.
Okay. I remember, I have a vague memory of one particular corridor, post-security in T2, that I believe we were saying there was traffic in the million, like 1 million visitors.
We had annually we were up to 21 million travelers. Okay. Very hard to say what that number will be ultimately for 2020. Yeah. But.
Well, thank you. Thank you. So now we're trying to get an initial perspective, an initial context for everyone. And moving on to Adriana Martinez. So Adriana Martinez is the chief curator at La Caja Galeria in Tijuana. Here we're a border town. However, she actually joins us from Mexico City today. And we know that they just had in Oaxaca, south of there, they had an earthquake. It seems that everybody's fine. So we're very happy to hear that. Adriana is an independent curator, editor, writer, and cultural activist. She has an MA in Women's Studies at San Diego State University, a special degree in art policies and art management at Universidad Autónoma Metropolitana, and a BA in art history at Universidad Iberoamérica. She is currently chief curator at La Caja Galeria in Tijuana, member of the Laboratorio Curatorial Feminista, and co-editor of Antidogma, the signature arts and culture magazine for the Universidad de la Comunicación. She worked for the Museo del Palacio de Bellas Artes, which is one of the most prestigious institutions in Mexico City, and the Museo Nacional de Arte, both in Mexico City, for almost 5 years. Her main areas of interest are performance art, the representation of women's bodies and sexuality, and liminal spaces and categories. Born and raised in Mexico City, her scholarly and creative work is deeply informed by her own border experience since having lived in San Diego-Tijuana region for more than 5 years. She has published several art-related articles, both in English and Spanish, and has curated over 15 exhibitions applying feminist and decolonial methodologies, both in USA and Mexico. Welcome, Adriana.
Hi, thank you very much, Susana, for the invite. I'm very glad to be here and being able to talk to you and being among peers, which is also part of our labor, I believe, as curators, to heal ourselves by telling our stories. So I would like to start by saying I've been working for La Caja for about 5 years now. I do work as a freelance counseling / curator, so that gives me also a sense of liberty and liminality that I always like. And I work from the distance. I live in Mexico City right now, and from here I do collaborate with them. But it is definitely a project that I hold really dear in my heart because I've seen it grow through the years, and I'd like to talk to you about it because I believe it's much more than a gallery. We have been talking about these different spaces and possibilities. So La Caja is really a private effort, which is something that is really different from the US context, where usually the arts are made accountable through private efforts. And in Mexico, it's usually the opposite. It tends to be the public sector that holds that up. So in that sense, La Caja is really a special project because not all private efforts in that sector succeed. We just turned 15 years 2 days ago, actually. So it certainly broke all our expectations. We were planning on creating all this celebration right now, and we had to put that on hold. But fortunately, we have been kept working a lot. We're close to the public, obviously, but that doesn't mean we're closed. Actually, we have seen our courses and online workshops grow to 100%, thanks to Zoom, as you all know. And we are certainly exploiting that area of being much more than a gallery, being also a hybrid arts complex that has evolved and that has this academic extension that allows the communication with the people of the area. And in that sense, I would like to also bring this perspective that actually TJ, being maybe this border town that is seen as a difficult, complex city, has really put into arts and the food industry and the wine and beer industries, like this triad through which they have been able to regenerate the social fabric. So this venue is, as you can see here in the background, has this urban-like feeling. It's housed on an old paper warehouse, and it's a very big complex. And we are now directing our attention to all these new necessities the pandemic has thrown upon us. And we are in line with what the state has been telling us about recommendations. The Secretary of State and the Secretary of Health here in Mexico, along with the Secretary of Culture, issued a guide with a lot of recommendations, among which are just cutting out on openings, cutting out on publications or handouts or printed material. And in that sense, we have to be like aware of this different logistics, but we have been imposing all these criteria, certainly to keep the distance and to reopen. We do actually are planning on reopening by mid-July, but through a different logistics. We are opening to small groups of people of no more than 4 people, and these will have to be done through through appointments. And we are going to be having all the material, the hygienic material at the entrance for people to rinse off their shoes, some masks if people are not coming in with masks, and trying to keep the distance and all what's the more obvious things. And actually we are just really looking forward to evolving in this more, I would say, technological kind of interaction with community, but because something that has characterized La Caja is this sense of community-based programs and having people coming in and out, taking classes, courses, and also appreciating the art that is shown in a sort of museum-like also venue. No, it's a gallery that sells art, but it's also a museum-like venue. And in that sense, we are really happy to be now recomposing our internal logistics teams. We are a team composed by 6 people, and well, no one has been furloughed. That is important to say. Everyone has kept our jobs, and we are still working, and maybe even more than we used to before, because this logic of Zooms and everything. But we are happy of how the public has been responding, and we are really happy to actually break the barriers of the border and coming in and being able to have this conversation among peers in the America, conceiving America not as the US, but America as a continent, no? Right. To see it more of a broad perspective on the arts world, and to see how we can relate and communicate and help each other, because through art, certainly all these topics sort of are put on the table, but also diffuse the barriers.
Yes, thank you. Well, and you really do have a very robust program. I'm very interested to see how you adapt in July with your reopening. I have seen a lot of museums pivoting to that new timed entry type of approach, and also pulling off of the idea of how some people in the restaurant community are no longer offering menus. You can scan a barcode or a QR code for the menu, for example, so that you don't even have to do that. However, some communities may not have the technology, available to do that. So I'll be interested to see how that works for you guys. I'm going to move on to introducing our last speaker, and then we'll open it up as an open forum. Thank you so much for joining us. Just hang on. Okay, so our final speaker is Andrew Oot. He is the executive director at Lux Art Institute. He's a curator and arts administrator with a bachelor's degree from California College of Arts and Crafts and a master's degree in museum studies from Harvard University's Extension School. He has been working in the arts for over 15 years with different schools, galleries, and museums based in California, Argentina, and Colombia. In 2008, he opened the Andrew Oot Gallery in Oakland, California, where he presented the work of emerging artists on an international level in order to show common intercultural ideologies. Oot also initiated a community public art project titled The Intersection in San Diego, California, which is super interesting. Look it up. His curatorial interests are focused on the history of Latin American photography and contemporary photography that transcends from bidimensional to three-dimensional. So welcome, Andrew. You may have to
unmute myself. Yeah. Yes, thank you so much for having me, Susanna. I appreciate it. And it's great to be with all of my friends and peers here on this panel. So thank you very much. Yes, Lux began just over 20 years ago as a museum without walls. We have a outreach program that continues today into local public schools. And then in 2007, we launched our Artist in Residence program. And so that's what we're known primarily for, is an artist in residence program. We have 5 artists who are commonly international artists that come for a 1-month period, and their work extends for another month. That's our main gallery. And then in 2014, we opened up our education pavilion, where we also house anywhere from 10 to 15 classes per year. I'm sorry, at any one time throughout the year. In addition, we have a large property. So we have 6 acres of land here in North County in San Diego, where we also have a sculpture trail, and we'll be continuing to add to that. So we are planning on opening in September of this year. Like others on this call, we're taking our time, ironing out all the details. I think I mentioned to someone recently that our reopening plans are currently at about 97 pages long. So it's a long process of going through all of this. I'm sure all of you can relate to that. But we want to make sure that as we're doing that, as we're building this new process, we're making sure to think about technology and how it's being implemented in the visitor experience, and how we can also provide that personal experience when it really matters. In the meantime, we're doing a lot of virtual programming. So I have a strong tech background as well. So we've pivoted quite quickly. In the last 3 months, we've produced 27 different webinars, converted almost all of our classes to virtual classes. We have art activities for kids using Instagram, social media, and other sources, and more. And we have quite a bit planned. Right when we were closing, we were just about to launch a new exhibit, which is my virtual background behind me, of Kanin Selesnik, whose work talks about the environmental impact and of humans of environmental impact on the earth. And it was actually called Troop of Fledermaus, which in German is bat troop. So it's all about how this bat troop goes around the world talking about pandemics, and as well as environmental change, very appropriate for the current state of things. Our next exhibit, unfortunately, won't be coming, but we've decided to reinvest the time and the finances to put that exhibit into an application that one could bring the museum to your own home. So our future outlook is sort of a interminglement of both the physical engagement as well as the virtual. and finding new ways of bringing objects into people's homes, finding new ways of engaging them in those virtual spaces.
Wonderful, thank you. I'm going to open up the conversation to the full panel. So I'm going to start this open forum having a conversation about what has been for you the most difficult part logistically of the reopening process. And I know you're not opening yet, but what has been the most complex part of just thinking through what that looks like for you? And feel free to just unmute yourself and speak. And you?
Well, I might, if I could,
Yeah.
I think there are certain things you can plan for, and then there are the unknown. So I think we all have a plan, and then we have a contingency plan, and then we have a contingency plan for the contingency plan. One thing that it so often comes down to is your staff resources. And we have a security force which is not, it's a bit complicated, but they are protective services from the Smithsonian rather than each individual unit. A number of them clearly have needed to continue to be on duty even through the shutdown, just to patrol the buildings and to keep the skeleton staff coming in and secure and that sort of thing. And they've been hit rather hard by the virus, by people having to be out. And so we're looking not only at diminished resources there, but for our visitor services, we depend a lot on volunteers, and many of them are elderly and in other risk groups. And so we're looking at diminished capacity there, plus just a sort of a general reluctance, frankly, to come back and perhaps be exposed, or having to be the people that tell people to keep your masks on and keep distance. And we have tiny elevators that officially only one person at a time can go up. We know that's going to be a definite problem. So it's kind of the diplomacy and the logistics and of crowd control and capacity for crowd control. It's our biggest concern. When we first open, understand we're going to be, we've calculated our capacity. Our guideline is 5 people per 1,000 square feet, which is, for us, is minuscule. That's kind of a icy Tuesday in February rather than a Labor Day weekend crowd. And so we're a little concerned about that. We probably will open some galleries right away that are more spacious. Others that are more close quarters will keep closed at the beginning. But it really, there's availability resources. I don't know if anybody's tried to buy sheets of acrylic lately, but they are scarce as hen's teeth to create these barriers and so on. So it's resources, whether it's materials, cleaning materials, or staff resources.
Wow, and I think that I see all of the heads nodding here, and it seems like that's definitely the resources and yeah, I didn't think about the volunteers. They're typically elderly that support the museum crew. And what do you do when someone is refusing to put a mask on? What does that look like? I mean, well,
we've all seen videos where it's been ugly at restaurants and places of that sort. I would hope such instances would be few and rare, but we don't really have enough. We don't have enough security personnel in uniform. We would be depending on junior staff in museum vests and T-shirts to try to do the policing, and so there's clearly a concern there about how to enforce without inviting belligerence or raised voices or worse.
Right. Does anyone else want to say anything about that? And I can ask. I have lots of questions that have come in from our audience.
I'd love to jump in. Since I'm obviously in a really distinct position, we sort of function like a mini arts organization embedded within a larger organization whose mission is not to present art, right? It's focused on helping people to travel from point A to point B. And so my primary challenge right now, and something that I'm constantly working on, is how to effectively advocate that the arts have to be part of the recovery and how we return to normal, or to the new normal, that arts integrated within the airport will actually help to ease this transition back. It will help to make people feel comfortable in a space that they already could have been anxiety producing for some people, but probably even more so as they start to return to travel. And so that's something we're constantly working on, is reminding our colleagues and advocating hard that the arts will help us, and we're here to advise marketing and our communications team and other our operations colleagues about how to do this effectively, and how to bring arts and artists actually to the table to help that solve those problems.
That's really interesting to me. I've heard people saying that the arts and arts organizations are second responders right now, because really, could we have gotten through all of this without it? Really, without the arts and music and film and theater and all these wonderful creative activities that creatives, we can't help ourselves, right? I mean, for those of us that create art, we can't help ourselves. We're going to make it whether we like it or not. And now it's accessible via, YouTube and all these places. So, arts and arts organizations are doing important work.
As a museum without walls, you're almost like a special event when we come into a museum and work together, because a lot depends on that opening, that big grand opening, and then all the people who haven't even been to that museum ever. And then we do programming to bring more people throughout the run of the exhibit. So right now, I don't know how it's going to work for the big openings, because it really is important to at least how we do things going forward. But it'll probably be like timed entry and that kind of thing. But still, it's something new for us to try and figure out how we can do the grand openings or not, how we do programming or not.
Can I add to that as
Yes.
well? So you mentioned, what my area of study is partly play work, which is a whole long story. I can talk about it another time, but play work is basically adults trying to figure out how to create the conditions for play, and how do you continue the child's ability to play, because children will play wherever. And so I've been thinking about that here. And if I was applying that really to the core of what we're doing, that we present art and we present the work of artists. Well, of course, we're held in place by our buildings, and we are so focused on, well, we want to bring people back to our buildings to experience it there. But how would it look different if we really were thinking about how do we continue this experience of art wherever people are? And we've been doing that virtually, I think, but we need to go further than that, because there's a lot of people who can't access those virtual experiences in the way that they might if they were in our spaces. So that's the thing that I keep thinking about. We focus on reopening. We want people to get back into our building, but are we really accomplishing our missions at the same time right now in this moment?
As a follow-up to that, Megan, I'm fascinated by how, we have this new normal here that we're all living through in our personal lives and experiencing everything virtually. So how are you all, if you're considering it all, how will you respond to this sort of growing preference, or perhaps at least tolerance, for digital and other reproductions versus the authentic object or the authentic experience? Post-COVID, a year from now, 2 years from now, do you see that next future incorporating this virtual reality as much or more, or instead of still? And for your specific space, it's all about interactivity. It's all about the touching and the grabbing and the jumping into and all of that. So what does that look like for you all, if you've thought that through yet?
We've been thinking about it all the time.
I would like to respond to that, because I've been thinking about how this platforms such as Zoom and all that has really opened up conversations that we usually would have, physically at a space, but thank you to what was hung on the walls. And right now, even if we do not have the objects physically, we do have the conversations. And I don't know certainly things have been going on in the US, I've been aware of that, but in Mexico City, conversations have been opened also because of that. The racism, gender issues and all that have certainly had a specific place. And now, thanks to these platforms, we are being able to put out these conversations into the public arena and actually have their responses. And that's also what art is about, is just prompting out these important conversations, perhaps difficult conversations, yeah, but having them openly and just having everyone chip in and to get a sense or a more accurate grip of who we're talking to, who's our public, and where we are at. So I do see the virtual as a tool that certainly helps. I'm not talking about just forgetting about the actual object, but moving forward to having conversations, because we as curators, as we were saying before starting right now, live, we were saying how we are narrators or we are storytellers. So this is the perfect space for that. And yeah.
I love that. If anyone has another comment, you're welcome to. I have lots of questions.
Yeah, I wanted to add just one little kind of connection with what Adriana was saying and what Gaidi mentioned too about having events and openings and this sort of connection to each other. I made a comment at the beginning of this presentation that we're all so quiet, and we're, you know, if we were in a space, in a physical space, we would all be communicating, we would all be chatting, and even up to the very moment at which Susanna, you would probably be like, okay, everyone stop talking at this moment, right? But now it's so easy to move into this because it's so quiet. And I think that that is a really important aspect to recognize when we go virtual. How do we define the difference between what we're providing as educational material versus how we build community? And I think that's kind of what Gaidi was referring to. It's that personal communication that we've lost. So for me, when I'm looking towards 1 year, 2 years in advance, I don't think that the virtual landscape will disappear and we'll go back to how things were. But I think there will be a melding of the two between the physical and the virtual. But that virtual engagement will be all that much more evolved and engaged to the point where we can create community, we can have conversations through a virtual environment, we can meet in virtual reality. And I don't have hesitation saying those things because I know that we will evolve into that sphere of things, and it's slowly happening. But ultimately, that's the only way that we're going to be able to, for the next year or 2 years, or however long COVID remains, that's really going to be the only way that we maintain and continue community. Because even my daughter, when she's on her Zoom classes, she loves to talk to the other kids. She loves to engage with people. And so, putting her on mute, I think would be devastating for her life. And I think for any of us too. I know that most of this room right now is on mute, but just hearing a cough in the crowd can bring some sense of human connection. So the question really is how do we do that in a virtual environment?
Let's talk about storytelling, because we are storytellers, right? I mean, curators have this responsibility to create the environment for which people engage with the collection. And so there are various ways to manage that. There's lots of different types of exhibition or museum experiences. There's immersive, there's static, you have the sort of the teacher voice or the motivator voice, right? And so what do you think has your approach to storytelling evolved in the last few months? Do you see that changing in the future as we're now engaged with social justice issues and climate? Remember climate? Remember climate change? Right, right before COVID hit, it was the Greta Thunberg effect, and there was this movement of major corporations committing to, for example, Nike, that had committed to making all of their tennis shoes from ocean plastic, for example. And there was this trend where we were starting to see, oh my goodness, we better do something now. And so do your spaces have that teacher voice, here it is, or do you have that motivator voice, like you have the ability to make this difference, or you have the ability, or what does storytelling look like for you, or how are you considering it right now as an individual, as a museum? Talk to me about that.
Well, when you were talking, it was making me think about how much internal work we need to do to be the storytellers that we need to be. Because I think that, curators might talk about the choice of artists and who we're showing and who we're exhibiting, but there's also a million other choices that we're making in our institutions, from who supplies our nitrile gloves to, who we're reaching out to during times of crisis and all these other things. And so I don't know, I think that the work that's happening behind the scenes hopefully is us questioning, are the right people in the room to tell those stories? And then what are those stories? And do we have the backup, thinking about statements that museums and other cultural institutions have made over the past month? Are we actually backing that up, right? So I'm not answering your question, but I think that that's really where it needs to be. What's the story we're telling internally, and how are we dismantling some of those, frankly, the white supremacy of museum institutions?
I think you asked the right question. Are the right people in the room to even have that conversation? Right. Start right there, right? So what is inexhibitable to you? You have this collection, and every, you all have different resources and different places where you source your collection. Some of you have it might be a grander picture kind of conversation. But what is inexhibitable to you as a curator, regardless of where you work as an institution right now? Just your personal, I'm thinking of, torture. There was a museum that focused on torture here in San Diego, in Balboa Park, for example. Graphic violence, or things that are mysterious or difficult to prove, or things that incite violence in this moment. What to you is not exhibitable?
I want to jump in here on the last question that you made, because I think that sort of leads into this, which is about storytelling in our current environment and who's doing the storytelling, what Megan was saying. I think that, and I don't want to speak for everyone, but from my perspective as a curator, I think that curators' roles are somewhat diminished with technology. And I think this is a sort of reflection, not just of our technological environment, but also because of what is happening with racial injustice and the environment and all the issues that are coming to the surface right now. Ultimately, I think that the most successful curator in the future will be one that is able to democratize their authority and give that authority to the public, allowing the audience to define history, not necessarily defining it for them. The meaningful experience will be defined by the ability for the exhibition to build these sustainable and measurable participatory experiences. This is a thought that comes from Nina Simon, who wrote the book, The Participatory Experience, who really experimented with what it means to engage audiences in museums. And then ultimately, humanity will be drives emotional response, or it is driven by emotional response. So if curators and museums are able to sustain an elevated emotional response over time, they'll have the highest affect for their community. And then that transitions into what's exhibitable. And it questions ultimately what the role is of the curator in the museum space, in the world. Because if the curator is not the authority, then the people can exhibit whatever they want. I also want to bring up an example of the Jurassic Museum of Technology in Los Angeles that if no one has been there, I highly suggest going. It's going to be almost impossible to find photos of it because you're not allowed to use your cell phone in the space. The Jurassic Museum of Technology is quite poignant because what they do is they question the idea of what is history and what is truth. And so the exhibits that they have on display feel real, they look real, they seem like they're real stories, but to be able to determine their truth is all up to the visitor. There's no way to look them up on your phone because you can't use your phone in the space. So it's really up to the individual.
So
I'm back.
I struggle with a lot of what you've just said, and I think perhaps what you've said applies to certain museums, but not to all. I'm long familiar with Nina Simon. I'm long familiar with this idea of getting rid of the authoritative voice, which I think is certainly valid. On the other hand, our visitors, and we do extensive surveys, and perhaps this is more characteristic of a natural history museum than a fine arts museum, they are looking for information, and they don't care if it comes from a senior curator or a well-trained volunteer, but they want to be able to ask questions and have answers. And if the answers are more leading questions, that's all to the good. But they want guidance. And I think there's a fine line between getting rid of the authoritative voice and essentially having no guidance or no fact-based information on which to make decisions. And granted, facts have often come from a white heteronormative society, and that has to break down. But I at least from my experience in our museum, there's certainly an interest in discovery and in sharing and in finding relevance and communicating and so on. But they still essentially want to know about things of the natural world and the cultural world, something on which they can hang their hat of appreciation or understanding. So I think the nature of information needs to change. The variety of sources of information need to change. But at least for a natural history museum, I can't see a solely public curated museum having much validity in the long run.
Yeah. I would add to that just to say that it's not what's exhibitable and what is not, but as to how the topic or the theme put there is tackled, from which perspectives are you coming from, and just to be able to put and set out the complete set of tools for the audience to actually get a grip and a hold, but not just one vision. That's what's important to me, to offer several, the most diverse possible visions, so as to actually do have people make their own opinion of it.
Agreed.
But yeah, I think to build on what Andrew was talking about, the Museum of Jurassic Technology, yes, you can walk into that space and you have to make decisions about what you're seeing, but you also have to understand the basics of how museums are constructed. It's much more interesting, I find, to those of us who have been behind the scenes and thinking about the construction of knowledge. And I love the Museum of Jurassic Technology, but I think that there's a certain assumption about that kind of knowledge. And so I'm curious about museums that are more explicit about the teams that put together exhibitions and actually put pictures up in their names. The Peabody Essex Museum has been doing this for a while, and you start to see, where is this coming from? Because there's an assumption, especially with Smithsonian, right? It's the Smithsonian, it's the voice of the Smithsonian versus the voice of the curator, the voice of the exhibit developer, all of these people who are on our teams.
You talked about fact-based, research, and we are living in this strange time where facts seem to have been dissipated. And I'm curious to know how, there's the logistics of the museum world of like creating an installation and the design of an installation or of an exhibition and all of that logistical work. And then there's this thematic the thematic logistics of creating an exhibition. And when you have pushback about facts, what are the values of your institution? And I'll just say this to Mike. I mean, clearly you are connected to the government. You have this, you're in this middle space. I know that our current administration is consistently trying to defund the museums, and so how do you navigate through these conversations? Are they affecting you yet at all, or are you?
Yeah, frankly, they've been affecting us for a very long time. We have a very explicit policy. We do have to find private money to support exhibits and so on. No donor ever has any say whatsoever over content. They're provided with a brief of what the exhibit is about, and if they can support that, great. We don't allow text review. We don't allow. We're very judicious about brand location or that sort of thing. We do try to get much more presence of those who develop the exhibit. So if any of you come to the museum, I could take you a tour through and you could see how we go from, well, for example, our Bones Hall, our osteology hall, opened the same month that the Beatles played Shea Stadium and has not changed. So if you want to see old school authoritarian voice, that's the way to see it. But then as you go through, you begin to see, okay, well, this exhibit, we talk a little bit more about the source, and here we actually have some pictures of the scientists, and here we've got a little better balance between male and female. We have some people of color. We have some scientists who are letting you know that not everything is solved, that there are still questions to be asked. So we do try to make inroads in that, and also in we have very challenging topics to deal with, like climate change and ocean acidification and all those sorts of things. We spend a great deal of effort working with experts in the field on science communication. What's enough to engage people without scaring them? What's enough to let them see the severity of an issue without feeling things are hopeless? It's an incredibly fine line to walk, as I imagine any of you who have ever had to deal with topics like that have. Where can we get people engaged and understand that they, as a small community, whether a school class or a local community, can actually make positive change and be part of the bigger picture? So it is a real struggle with that. And it's also, people mentioned decolonization efforts and being frank about where collections come from and how they were acquired. And we're, like many of you who have collections, are going through a soul searching and a review on the nature of the collections, and being more transparent in our databases about how and where they were collected, repatriation when it's a, communities are interested and concerned about that, and so on. But it really is, almost like a daily struggle, frankly, making sure you're educating your volunteers to ask the right questions and be able to respond to things. So yeah, we do. I would say, just by the nature of being a natural history museum, the societal issues that a lot of you face are not as immediate to us, although clearly with our secretary being a spokesman for the organization, and the phenomenal work he did in developing the African American History and Culture Museum, we have a fantastic, deeply experienced spokesperson to both speak to the public and to guide us on how to address such issues.
This is where I was starting to touch base on the sort of voice that you are all, whether or not you're revisiting the voice in your didactic. Are you attempting a motivator voice in this? It almost feels like a responsibility right now, to have this, with everything happening in the world, from the pandemic to social justice issues, climate change, everything, it's all hitting us now, and so what is our responsibility then to transform the visitor experience to such that can be hopeful? Or are we factual and, because the facts are a little sad right now. So what does that, what is our responsibility? Are you all engaging in that conversation in your institutions?
African American Museum, it's always been a responsibility. That's part of what we did. And I want to also say that when we worked with the Mingei, for instance, they had the Black Dolls exhibit that they had done. But they collaborated with us because of the history of the Black Dolls, and like Aunt Jemima and those sort of things really had a lot of pain that went with it. And so they did not address that, but they allowed us to collaborate and have that discussion, and then have programming around that. So kudos to the Mingei for recognizing this unexhibitable part, potentially, or not people who didn't have knowledge of the pain that we were.
Christine, do you want to mention anything about that?
I would love to. I've been really doing a lot of inward thinking. I've been really focused on the white gaze that I think is very much a part of a lot of our museums. I've been doing creating a lot of space for myself and for our employees. The staff has been doing a real deep dive on this, and we're trying to make space. We're trying to make Zoom opportunities where we can just connect and not talk about work. We're sharing what we're reading. We're sharing webinars. We're doing a lot of deep thinking. People matter. I think that's what's really important to me, to our constituents. So, how can we really put that into effect? I think we can really try to focus on what are our goals. We want to hold ourselves accountable, and we want to articulate what we're going to do. So at Mingei International, while we're closed and have been closed, we have been doing that hard work. So we want to be able to share it. We want to be able to continue to do those kind of collaborations that Gaidi mentioned, but we want to do more. We've always striven to have multiple voices, right? And I think that's one way to address what we're talking about, right? It's not just my voice as a curator, no matter what my color is, but it's trying to have multiple voices, multiple ages, multiple backgrounds, socioeconomic backgrounds. So I think that's the kind of work that we can do to try to bring more voices to that table. We want to bring more narratives. It's not just one story. We have tried to do work at Mingei in the past with Black Dolls. That was a powerful exhibition, and we really wanted to address something that had impact. We've worked with Dene populations, Navajo weavings. We really wanted to bring their voice into what you said is just some horrific history. So we don't want to shy away from the history. We want to try to provide multiple voices and multiple narratives. And that's kind of the work that we want to do moving forward.
Yeah. It's not easy. All of this is tremendously hard for all of us. We've all had our moments of deep introspection and determining whether or not we've done enough. In the museum and exhibition world, the answer will always be no, we have not. And so if we start from there, then we can only get better. So I want to remain hopeful about what we are capable of. And while we are not, some of us, directors of institutions and have this specific role in the curatorial realm, we also have an opportunity there to influence the direction of the organization with our, curatorial and historical knowledge of our craft. I want to get into the museums and your exhibition spaces, the survival, right? Because we're still in this COVID place. Who knows what the next couple months are going to bring, right? I mean, we literally, aliens could come from the sky at this point, and I wouldn't flinch. In fact, I think it happened. In some version of reality, I saw something like that, and I was like, great, here it comes. But let's talk about what values are dictating the choices, the financial choices of your institution, right? And we have, how are you considering? Are you considering like safety nets for a future pandemic? Are you are you anticipating a normalcy 3 years out and planning for that? I mean, what does that look like for you in terms of your financial planning? If you have any knowledge of that, some of you maybe are not privy to that information in your institutions, but what are you hearing? What are you hearing? And I know some of you have had to furlough, so that's certainly a very, very difficult choice. And I know that that's a value judgment, or it's a value statement when an institution, an organization decides where to put their money and where not to put their money. So are you privy to any of those conversations, or maybe that's a conversation for a different group of museum leaders? I'm not sure. What do you know? How are you making those choices?
I can speak briefly about that. From my position, I mean, unfortunately, we had to let go of some of our teachers for our classes. We were able to hire some back, but I think ultimately when we think about the contributed versus earned income of the institution, we have to diversify those income sources. For me, and this kind of goes back to what I was saying before about diversifying the collections and the knowledge base, I think the same thing has to be done from a visitor, from a public perspective. I mean, this would be what would be considered grassroots funding. So I think that if we find ways of engaging and including our audiences, that there could be new ways of bringing them in and feeling more emotionally as well as financially responsible for that organization.
So let's talk about, I love the idea of failing forward. And so meaning that you use the lessons of a failure to pivot and try something new. So do you have any recent examples of any programming or activities or projects that you failed on, and that's okay, that you had to pivot quickly and transform?
I can share a recent program that we initiated a few years back that we called Design Ahead. And my intention with this program was to give an opportunity for emerging designers and artists, maybe aspiring architects and engineers, to respond to a real world design challenge that we actually face in the airport, and then come up with a response to that problem. So I've had the privilege of working with a number of different partners, but an early wonderful partner to me was Marisol Rendon, who's a professor and an artist who teaches at Southwestern College. Just a lesson that we learned very quickly was we were a little ambitious in what we thought that we could accomplish. We gave a really lofty challenge to her students, and they dove in full steam ahead. But you know, one semester actually goes very, very quickly when you're challenging a group to understand the airport environment, to wrap their head around how people use the space, and then design something in response. So she was, again, very gracious and a good partner to me, and we learned a lot together. And in the next iteration, I realized it makes a lot more sense to invite these young students to develop conceptual proposals as opposed to really trying to come up with a concept and fabricate it in a really truncated time frame.
That's already difficult for professionals.
Exactly.
The quick turnaround. Anyone else? Let's talk about our failings, right? I mean, these are important. This is important because this is how we learn from one another, and this is how our audience can learn from these things. So whether it's, choices of exhibitions, or whether it's, overreaching, as, Lauren mentioned, and maybe not a recent example, it can also be from the past. But I think recent examples are important also because we're dealing with this COVID response. You know, we're all learning how to Zoom, and I've failed at that a lot. And I can move on to your question. Go ahead.
Yeah, we build failure into pretty much everything that we do. So I tell my staff that if you are not failing, then you're not learning. So I would say that, you know, if we as museums want to grow in this period, then we also need to consider that we need to think about everything that we do and change the way that we're doing things, try new approaches and learn from them. I go by more of a, you make incremental changes over time versus spending 2 to 5 years on something and then release it, and then all of a sudden you realize that, hey, that didn't really work exactly how I wanted, but I spent 2 to 5 years on that project. I like to work on smaller things and see how successful they are. So I would say in the last 3 months, we've probably cut about 5 to 10 different projects that we've tried and just failed. But if you build the failure into what you're doing, then you're going to be all that more successful.
Thank you. We have a few questions coming in here that I'd like to address. How can the arts be fostered in neighborhoods, right? So right now we're not in our functional spaces. And so how can we foster arts in neighborhoods and democratize the arts and build support for your creativity throughout a city? Have you attempted any outreach programs outside of your spaces?
Well, I can start to answer that a little bit with the idea that for a long time, I haven't thought of museums as buildings. I've thought of them as ideas, and actually more of a collection of relationships. You know, museums are a network of relationships. And so thinking about, you know, so we've all freaked out, we don't have buildings anymore at this moment. You know, well, now is the time to just take it out into the community. And I think that's really difficult because there's a lot of unexamined identity tied in with the actual space. You know, so one of the things that we've been talking about, and one of my colleagues is actually on the call too, Lonnie, but we wanted to have a Airstream trailer that we would take out into parks, and it'd be sort of like the ice cream truck has come, but it's, you know, the art truck. And I know that people have done that before, and I've done that in previous positions, but that's where it's at. If you're really listening to what people are comfortable with, right now we're hearing families are more comfortable being in parks. They're comfortable being outside. They're taking walks. So you really need to go where the people are. But what's difficult is we are these larger institutions with so many voices and so many mouths to feed, right? It's not as easy to do that. I'm seeing really great work by Artreach. If you're familiar with Artreach, they've been killing it. Like, they had a mural project that was set to work with elementary school, and they delivered literally pieces of that mural so kids could paint that mural at home, and then reassembled it in one place so that it could be together. Like, that's what's required, but it's really hard because museums are so much more like steamships than they are the kayaks that we need to be right now.
That's a great example. I'm curious to know what organizations are inspiring you right now other than your own. So you just gave a shout out to Artreach. What do you see other people doing that you're like, yes, that? Talk to me. I'm gonna think on it. I mean, I know you run very inspirational institutions, so I'll start there. But it is important to sort of acknowledge what your peers are doing and, you know, see if there's something there that's not happening. I've seen people doing, which I think is so cool, by the way, these, and I don't know what they're called, but they're like these 360 cameras that you place inside of spaces where you can put on a virtual headset and experience what's behind you and above you and all of that. And I feel like there's so much potential there with theater and museum spaces and, I mean, haunted houses, and, you know, if you turn around and something's behind you, you know, I mean, just all of this conceptual kind of place where there's an organization here locally, it's a dance company that's doing a virtual reality walkthrough of this very old theater in San Diego, where you have to walk down corridors and you walk into a space. And so they'll mail you a virtual reality headset, which is basically this cardboard structure where you place your phone and then you can see things. And but that's an innovation that existed already pre-COVID, but now they're taking it into this new dynamic, which I am fascinated by. I think it's just wonderful. And that's the Rosin Box, by the way. I'll give them a shout out.
I was inspired by Wonder Spaces that comes around now and again. And I don't know if it's still here right now, but when I was there, I said, what it would be like to redo portions of the civil rights movement in a wonder space kind of situation where you could walk through the diners that the freedom riders sat at, or you could participate and be walking through like in a wonder space environment. It's on my mind for fundraising issues. Sometimes a big thing I want to do, but I was inspired by wonder spaces for what it can be to the civil rights movement.
I'd love to work with you on that, Gaidi.
Great.
I think that's something that would be really, really cool. I'm also, as our organization typically hosts cultural events, and we haven't been able to do so. We're focusing on the other two components of our programming, which is the arts journalism and the professional development. But the cultural programming is gone right now, and we're exploring how to do that and how to have people have inspiring experiences that are also interactive and focused on a grander mission, which is to support the creative community and highlight them. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about that offline. But
I'd like to highlight two organizations. One is the Garage Museum in, I can't remember if it's Moscow or St. Petersburg. It's in Russia, the Garage Museum. They actually have a program called Garage Digital, and it's a pretty diverse program of digital offerings and ways that artists can leverage digital technologies to create new experiences. So I think it's garage.digital if you go online.
okay.
The other space is not digital programming. It's actually more analytical programming or analytical actions, I would say. The Oakland Museum of Art is doing a fantastic job at measuring the effect of their exhibitions on their audiences. In fact, I think Lori Fogarty and Lonnie Bunch were in a conversation as part of the American Alliance of Museums recently to talk about racial injustices and how that affects museums. But specifically, the Oakland Museum of Art is really understanding their audiences and being able to manipulate their exhibitions to attend to their needs. And I think that's very respectable.
To me, what's been more touching, it's not organizations per se, but more like people, actually the artist community and the curatorial community of people that work at museums that have actually turned out from the sphere of the arts world and the cultural world to actually, more than pushing out an agenda, they're becoming the agenda itself. That meaning going out to the streets, as you can imagine, we are talking from a privileged place right now. I'm at home right now, being able to work from the distance with technology, but I know there are many people who are out there who are going on a daily basis to work because they cannot be at home. So people are going out, sharing food, bringing supplies for hospitals and things. So that to me has been like a really also super 180 turn or spin-off to the topic we are like talking about, because we're talking about social justice, and just making it a blah 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 thing is really cool of how we're planning to transform our institutions or to push forward certain values over others. But just being that change, as factually going out and being there on the streets has been like really touching and thought-provoking during this period.
Absolutely.
Adriana, I wanted to actually follow up on that, because that's what I was getting at with this idea of play work, that in order to allow children to play, there are so many other things that need to happen. We talk about it, of course, with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and Panka, the artist, and I, we've talked about that so much that one of the characters in her new project that's going to open hopefully this fall is Maslow. But what are the things, so that right now, if our community is facing major crises, multiple crises, what are we doing to ease those things? through art, but also just getting out there to help. You know, in my magical world, all museums, when COVID-19 happened, kept all their staff, and we all went to work in the community in different ways, right? That's how I wish things would go. And, you know, maybe in the future, we're right now building the networks that in the next crisis we face, we'll be able to do that.
Related to building the networks, and I have all of you, I'm not sure all of you have had a chance to speak on your shout outs out there, but there's folks here that are suggesting a collaboration with institutions in the community that have been struggling. And so, you know, being in organizations that are experiencing some level of stability at this time, there are other smaller arts institutions and organizations that are struggling that could use that partnership, collaborative support in order to continue their programming, and that would also diversify your audience and, you know, provide their audience with an opportunity to see the work that you're doing. So locally, organizations like that include the World Beat Center, Centro Cultural de la Raza, Chicano Park Museum, Chinese American Museum, and, you know, in Washington, D.C., I'm sure there are lots of other smaller institutions that perhaps have programming and resources that you had not considered, for example. Okay, so we are, I'd like to talk about the logistics of programming and, you know, curating. Are you curating virtually right now for those of you that are planning? I mean, are you having Zoom meetings to plan your exhibitions? I mean, typically there's site visits involved, and, you know, a lot of that kind of, you know, you need to see the piece in front of you, but how is this happening logistically in this transition?
Well, if I could speak, and again, I'm kind of the odd duck here, but we, our collections care staff is really just bare bones too. You know, we have, I have, for a while there, I was going in twice a week to make sure that the coral reef tank was working well. And so we were taking turns doing that. We have live collections like the insect zoo and the butterfly house that need to be maintained. But then we also have, what was last count, 144.5 million things in our collection, maybe 130 million, which are pinned bugs, but still there's a great level, you know, pest control and management and review and checking that has to be done. So, so the collections care is going on. Our teams are continuing to work on future exhibits, but they have hit roadblocks. For example, we're at the point where we really need to narrow down choices on artifacts or specimens to be shown. And when you can't get in, when you can't really take a close look, when you can't perhaps check things that might not be in the database, like accurate enough dimensions that you could even know whether it's these 6 things will fit in the case, or what the weights might be, or that sort of thing, or just an eyeballing the condition. If you've got 2 fish in alcohol in a jar, which one looks better to put on display? So yeah, we are starting to hit definite roadblocks on that, and we've had to push 2 major exhibits forward by several months just because we really haven't had the capacity to get past those roadblocks.
Anyone else? Let's talk about,
well, I was just going to say, it's been interesting because at the time that we closed down, we were about to launch our Mass Creativity Festival and workshops, which we've been doing for many years. And the intent is we have an artist in residence who then works within the community to develop an idea for his or her installation. So with Panka, who's our artist in residence, we've been doing a lot of that, you know, through Zoom, and we did some amazing drawing classes with kids where she was talking about the characters that she was developing. But on one hand, I think that, like, behind the scenes, Panka and I have had many more conversations than we would normally have about the artwork and where it's going. But the problem is, it's really just us. Because of what's happened to our museum and because of layoffs and so on, there's just so few of us who are left. And so that's something that I'm thinking about, you know, behind the scenes, the and I also was talking about this, the stumble upon nature of being in an art space, right? And you never know who you're going to run into when you go to a museum or other art space. It's the same thing that happens in developing artwork inside the museum internally, because somebody might overhear a conversation, say, oh, hey, I have an idea I'd like to share about that. And that's not happening because it's just in this little tiny Zoom, two Zoom squares, right?
I think that's going to be the pivot. And it's interesting because I think in the future, you know, I'm hoping that these technologies that we're taking advantage of right now also become a resource for us later. I mean, do we really need to go back to that place of, you know, rushing through traffic, hurrying up and getting out the door at a certain time, dropping our kids off, doing all of this, sitting in checking emails when we could be doing it at home, you know? So these virtual meetings have sort of exposed that we don't always need to be in the office from 9 to 5, and maybe that's can be served as an opportunity. And also, as you see, I mean, we're able to have these types of conversations with people from across the nation and across the world. And scientists are doing it, and you know, physicians are doing it when they're having conversations about COVID-19, and artists and curators and, you know, professionals from all the theater community is doing it as well. They're just starting to have conversations that they wouldn't have had otherwise. I'd love to hear what you think has been a good thing that has happened as a result of the last few months. What is the positives that have come out of this in your eyes, from your perspective?
Well, I'll share something from the public art perspective, which is that through my work on the Public Art Coalition of Southern California, we in the past only met twice annually. It was primarily a networking, professional development group. But in the current situation, we are switching gears and realizing that we really have a responsibility to function more as an advocacy group. So we've actually reached out to our, what's called the Northern California Public Art Coalition, and we're essentially functioning almost as one unit now. We meet every month, which we never did consistently in the past. And so it feels really energizing and exciting that we're collaborating across the state, sharing ideas and actually kind of making a task list of work that we want to accomplish together. And because we're talking more frequently, because of the ease of this platform, yes, we would much rather be face-to-face and sharing a cup of coffee together, but because of the ease of this, we have 30 plus members attending every month. And I love that connection. And I love that, like I said, we're actually getting work done as opposed to it really being more of an informal gathering twice a year. So that's one benefit that has been really encouraging to me.
I want to add on that, because this is not for me coming as a curator at La Caja, but more of like an editor of Anti-Dogma, the magazine I publish along with Reina Aguiar. We are holding weekly conversations with people from the arts world, and they are free and they are open to the public, and they are open forums for discussion. And what's been really great is having people writing back and saying, hey, that was amazing. I wouldn't have imagined that person was the director of such and such museum, or this person was. So it was like putting faces onto institutions through these virtual forums that have certainly sort of, even if we're separated in time and we know there are always human behind institutions, just having these sort of connections with them and actually hear them speak, and us being on our sofas, in our houses, just make them sort of more familiar, like, and that has been something that many people have been telling us, and I do share that opinion too, and I think that's that's a good thing.
And that was the last question to the group, so please address the question, and then we'll wrap up. We have about 5 minutes left. Anyone else? What good has come out of this in the last few months from your perspective?
I think what's been a great discovery is how resilient people can be. And this has been a real test, both between COVID and social upheaval and all the examination that is going on, is that people can be resilient, and they can be more resilient when they are sharing with other people and learning how to make connections. It's been rewarding on my end that people have kind of stepped forward to take charge of things which might not have. As people have referenced, this Zoom grid is sort of democratizing, and people have participated in meetings that often would have just sat back. Our board meeting was done via Zoom and was one of the most productive ones we've ever had, I think, because of that. And also, people discover a caring for their coworkers. If it's a large organization, I think a little bit just in the abstract, we know there are people there who are cleaning. We know there are security guards. We want to provide them with meals and snacks and that sort of thing. But also in the particular, the individual connections, I think make us feel more unified, more pairing for the greater good. And I think that's been a really rewarding aspect of what we've been through lately.
I'll quote, just to say something really quick there, quoting Frankel, those who have a why can live and bear with almost any how. And I think that might speak to why we're still pushing forward. Gaidi.
Yeah, one of the good things that's happened is the Black Lives Matter movement with the young people, and all the changes that have been made as a result. I think that's been very, very good. But also I want to add the statues that are coming down as art people just hurts me because of the art. I totally support the Black Lives Movement and them taking the sculptures down. Yet as an art person, that's art, and it's just hard for me to just be okay with it. I am, but I struggle with it because it's art.
Well, it's an opportunity to replace them with something that is uplifting and exciting and encouraging, and I think that's the next phase of moving through this, right?
I just want to add that I think that change has allowed us to be a little bit more creative than we were in the past. So I found a lot of opportunities to really leverage that change in my life, not just in my work, but also in my life, and to think about the things around me and really question everything. So Black Lives Matter has done that for me. It made me question my history and the actions that I take now, as well as our institutional actions. But I think that even what was mentioned before, I think Mike mentioned this about our understanding the security guards position and all of our lower level staff at museums and what they're going through as well. I think we've all become one larger human family. And so it's really made me think about how we can all be together and sort of decentralizing a little bit of how we run as institutions and think about collaboration and change as one.
Thank you. Has everyone given their sense, or I'm going to wrap up? Well, let's take a breath there. That's the end of our event. I'd like to thank our incredible lineup of speakers for offering their insight on how we can move forward through upheaval. Megan Dickerson, Gaidi Finnie, Christine Heatbrink, Lauren Lockhart, Michael Lawrence, Adriana Martinez, Andrew Oot, and wanted to just also give a shout out to our chef, Maeve Rochford, who was able to provide this tea party edition for some goodies, and all of you have some goodies coming your way. We wish you, all of you, our curatorial leadership team here, we wish you all much success along your journey to program remotely, to reopen safely. And to our audience, I hope that this experience has provided you with the tools and the resources to continue along your curatorial path confidently through the pandemic and anything else that may come our way this year. We don't know what the next few months will bring, but as an organization dedicated to advancing the creative industry workforce, Vanguard Culture will be here for you along the way. Please stay safe out there, stay inspired, never stop creating.
And remember that in times of crisis, humanity looks to the arts to bring them peace and hope. Artists and arts institutions are doing very important work. Don't forget that. If any or all of the organizations inspired you today, please consider supporting them with a monetary donation. You may visit our event page for more information about the organizations that were represented here today. Please follow Vanguard Culture on social media at Vanguard Culture, at Culturally Savvy, or visit vanguardculture.org to be a part of our season. Thank you again, and be well.